All right. In this paper, we are going to share the findings of a systematic review where we looked at academic papers published over a 30-year period that address the ethics of using digital games as part of mental health interventions. My name is Dr. Emma Reay. I'm a senior lecturer in emerging media at the University of Southampton. And this research project was conducted by myself, by Dr. Gabriela Pavarini, who is the NDPH Intermediate Fellow at the Ethics Centre at the University of Oxford, and who is also here to field questions in the chat and chip in as and when. And also by Lindsay Smith, who is a clinical psychologist and researcher. We'll start by explaining why we should be concerned about the ethical implications of designing games as therapeutic interventions in response to the current mental health crisis. Then we will describe how we conducted our systematic review, and we'll list our key findings. And finally, we're going to reflect on why this matters, and we'll focus specifically on what we think is missing from the literature that we reviewed so that we can point to possible new research directions to explore in the future. Over the past 2 decades, therapeutic digital games have become increasingly popular in psychology and psychiatry. This includes serious games or gamified experiences that directly target mental health or neurodevelopmental conditions, as well as games that aim to prevent or alleviate the mental health consequences of experiences such as domestic violence, bullying, and sexual abuse. These technology advances have garnered substantial media and scholarly attention. Commentators have expressed enthusiasm about the possible benefits, such as the fact that games technology can be scaled to be made available to more people, and the fact that the fun and pleasure associated with games make them an appealing form of intervention. However, along with the enthusiasm, ethical and societal concerns have started to arise about the implications of so-called games on prescription, including the ethics of the financial models underpinning these kinds of interventions, as well as the clear need for new updated forms of regulations to protect players, clinicians, and also designers against potential harms. There have been calls for greater rigor in the empirical evaluation of applied games to mental health problems, i.e., do they actually work? Is this enthusiasm really warranted? Or more precisely, are the studies that underpin this enthusiasm really that robust and reliable? So far, metacritical reviews suggest moderate effect sizes for game-based applications in depression, as well as potentially clinically significant but more mixed reports in reductions of symptoms in anxiety. General effectiveness has been reported in improving cognitive areas in ADHD, social skills in ASD, and literacy in learning disabilities. There are also some reviews identifying opportunities for therapeutic gaming experiences to manage psychosis, and these definitely deserve further exploration. Nevertheless, adequately powered trials and direct comparisons of game-based interventions and active controls are still lacking, and there have been calls for more robust mechanistic studies to prove the link between targeted design and therapeutic effects. Furthermore, there is still a real lack of research specifically addressing aspects of gaming experiences as opposed to just digital tech experiences, which have the potential to raise unique ethical issues in their application within mental health care. For example, it is necessary to acknowledge the ambiguities and complexities of play, which can involve subtle social negotiations and also a constant oscillation between the submission to and the subversion of a specific rule set. In other words, to adopt a illusory attitude is to engage playfully. Is to engage playfully and potentially disruptively with concepts of authority, ideas of stable identity, and with social norms. Finding workarounds, cheat sequences, and learning about shortcuts and solutions from other players all add dynamics of complexity to an already non-linear process. Additionally, there is the issue of the persuasive nature of games, which can create illusions of agency while simultaneously disciplining the player through coercive design. Furthermore, the competitive nature of several forms of play entails ethical issues that range from questions of foul play, poor sportsmanship, and so on, through to the impact of failure on the player's self-esteem, as well as debates about the validity of quantifying an experience like mental wellness or mental illness using standardized responder feedback loops that are central to gamifications, i.e. through sort of points, badges, and leaderboard style mechanics. It is also important to consider the opportunity to play as a human need that is part of our evolutionary legacy. I would even say human right, but that's my personal opinion. How and when this need/right is encouraged or restricted has implications for the psychological well-being of society in general. The ideological opposition of play and work, for example, or play and seriousness, can shape culturally specific responses to the use of applied digital games. What I'm saying is there are ethical ramifications to challenging or affirming the polarization of play and seriousness. In short, the ethical questions that arise from the instrumentalization of games and play need to be further explored with regard to the use of digital games in the context of mental health and wellness. So how did we approach this project? Following previous research into empirical ethics within the fields of medical technology, we focused on synthesizing and documenting the opportunities and concerns raised in the literature on applied games in mental health care. We searched across 4 electronic databases, PubMed, PsycInfo, EthicsWeb, and Scopus, and additionally researched in the journal Game Studies, which unlike other sort of major gaming journals, didn't actually appear in any of those databases. We searched manuscripts covering a combination of 3 main concepts: mental health, gaming, and ethics. We did a title and abstract screen to decide whether to review the full text, and we used co-rating techniques throughout this whole process to make sure all 3 of us were in agreement about what to include or exclude based on our shared set of criteria. 5,501 papers were retrieved through our systematic search, of which 158 were retained for a full text screening. Of these papers, 69 met our inclusion criteria and were therefore retained for data extraction, but following data extraction and quality ratings, it was noted that 27 of these papers actually had very low levels of ethical content, and so we decided to exclude these papers from our main reported results. A final number of 42 papers were therefore included in our narrative synthesis and critical appraisal. This is just a breakdown of the different types of papers that appear within that final corpus of 42, really just to demonstrate how few of the papers, only 5, directly addressed ethics as the main aim of the paper. We've arranged our findings on the following 3 slides into 2 balanced columns on purpose, because we really wanted to drive home the fact that every benefit that was put forward in the literature was often matched elsewhere by an equal but opposite drawback. We found that there was this kind of contradiction throughout the literature, or rather that the benefits and the risks of applied gaming and mental health were often 2 sides of the same coin, hence my little coin gif in the corner. So I'm going to go through each of these and give a little bit more context on what we found. So starting with access. The most frequently mentioned benefit of mental health games was their ability to increase access to care. Some authors made more general claims relating to the ubiquity of smartphones and wearable technologies. Others discussed issues that more uniquely pertain to games themselves. So for instance, the appeal and popularity of digital games, especially for younger populations, was a commonly mentioned advantage. On the other hand, the fact that games require supportive infrastructure, like including computers, smartphones, internet connections, and so on, that was described by others as a challenge that potentially restricts access to care among certain groups. Next pair we have is inclusion. Some authors describe digital games as an inclusive medium, which could be adapted to the needs of each user. So for example, you could use adaptive joysticks to facilitate independent use by individuals with physical disabilities. On the other hand, some of the papers argue that digital gaming requires skills and experiences, and therefore mental health games might in fact worsen inequalities by systematically excluding groups with lower digital literacy, cognitive skill, or physical ability, such as elderly patients or those who are not fluent in English. Most of the games, nearly all of the games, are only available in English language. Others worried that it could exclude individuals with specific mental health diagnoses, such as depression, who might find it difficult to keep motivated via a standalone tool. Finally, authors mentioned that games often lack socio-cultural validation/sensitivity, making them unsuitable across cultural groups. Next up, we have cost effectiveness. Many authors praise the cost effectiveness of games as interventions, alluding to the reach and spread that can be achieved through an applied game. Others cautioned that this cost-benefit ratio requires more careful assessment, given the high cost of production, equipment purchase, and also of ongoing maintenance, and the complex nature of the design work involved compared to other interventions. And lastly, on this slide, we have a pair about stigma. Many authors referred to the potential of digital games to overcome stigma associated with mental health help seeking, given their easy access and rooting in popular culture. But exactly because of this rooting in entertainment, authors cautioned that clinicians and patients might not really believe this is actually a credible therapeutic approach. Authors warned that many people, including professionals, academics, and patients, hold negative attitudes towards technology and towards digital games in particular. The next risk and benefit related to interdisciplinarity. So interdisciplinarity and academia-industry collaboration was raised as a core challenge across a lot of different papers, specifically around recruitment and also collaboration within these interdisciplinary teams. Authors frequently referred to the academia-industry gaps that exist, such as things like pace, the differences in pace. So controlled studies, for example, require approvals processes that can take a really long time, whereas the games industry is able to and kind of wants to rapidly change and iterate and respond. The next pair relates to motivation. Due to their playful nature, games were described as a highly motivating medium with the potential to make mental health interventions fun and enjoyable. This motivational nature helps make the pathway to treatment as easy and as frictionless as possible, which may result in higher engagement and lower attrition in digital treatments. On the flip side, games' potential for addiction and misuse emerged as a substantive concern. Further emotional concerns were raised, including potential stress and frustration when the game stops feeling fun, but players still feel compelled to play. But yeah, their motivation to play is no longer sort of intrinsic. The next opportunity/concern related to the effectiveness of these interventions. The potential for effectiveness of games was commonly mentioned as a benefit, most notably in the field of phobia treatment, where virtual reality games and scenarios have been successfully applied for over a decade. However, many researchers emphasize the need for more and for better quality research around the efficacy of games-based interventions. Others highlighted the current lack of understanding of the so-called active ingredients through which patients benefit from applied gaming interventions. The lack of research on effectiveness before games are actually made available to the public could also mean that users are receiving help that is at best ineffective or at worst even harmful, even if it's only harmful in that it diverts their energy and attention away from seeking more effective support elsewhere. And finally, better or worse treatment relating to flexibility and customization. The flexibility and adaptability of games allow custom-made features that adapt to a person's need and allow for personalization. For instance, one of the papers mentioned the use of the patient's own voice and content in a digital game for psychosis, making the game more relevant to the user and the intervention potentially more effective. Such malleability also allows for the advantage of adjusting the potency or dose, in scare quotes, of the intervention. So for example, in exposure therapy, games can potentially allow sort of gradual exposure to potentially threatening stimuli in order to scaffold gradual psychological change. And yet, authors cautioned that, especially when used without professional oversight, therapeutic features or intended messages in games can be communicated poorly, leading to misunderstandings, which result in a lack of efficacy, essentially. Final slide of paired opportunities and concerns. So the first one here relates to the idea of games as a rehearsal space. So games can offer a safe way of facilitating repeat rehearsal of new behavior and subsequent generalization into real-world settings. High presence and immersion were mentioned here as means of achieving high fidelity in behavioral and emotional responses and supporting this end goal of real-world generalization. Other authors, however, argued that games were non-naturalistic by their very nature and were an insufficient prototype to experience. And these authors were very skeptical about the transference of in-game skills to real life. And even amongst those who accepted that games could be an adequate prototype to life, they raised concerns about potential harms to users, such as the confusion between reality and fantasy, or the intensification of experiences, for example, through information overload with negative emotional effects, especially for younger players and children. Authors warned that games that feature high levels of realism and visual fidelity, especially VR games or those with photorealistic 3D graphics, can expose players to distressing stimuli, potentially re-traumatizing patients, especially when it's not expected. Next up is to do with monitoring. The possibility for real-time monitoring and rich data capture was described as an important benefit. Games allow therapists to measure, observe, and monitor a client's cognitive and affective processes and decision-making in a way that is ecologically valid, allowing fast response and targeted interventions. In direct contrast, others referred to games' reduced ability to identify, monitor, and respond to risks and emergencies, especially if these games are being accessed outside of institutional settings and the user's physical location is unknown. Then we have social connection. Several authors mentioned that games can foster positive social connection. Some referred to their potential cooperative and collaborative nature, providing the possibility of reducing loneliness and increasing social capital and social skills. On the other hand, others argued that games can be an isolating experience, digital games this is, which can lead to reduced face-to-face communication. Many authors argued that applied games, especially when used as standalone treatments, might offer substandard care that cannot be equated to that offered by trained professionals. And the lack of human-to-human connection was described as really detrimental to the appropriate assessment of the patient's needs, as well as, to moment by moment responding to those needs. Then we have anonymity. The possibility of anonymity within game environments was perceived as a benefit. Some mentioned that anonymity could help overcome the stigma, preventing some from accessing conventional therapies. However, others raised safety concerns when users play games anonymously and therefore cannot be contacted if heightened risk to their mental state or towards others becomes evident. Several papers raised concerns regarding data privacy and safety when data are non-anonymous. Many mentioned the potential sensitivity of the user data collected during gameplay, which might be put at risk of unauthorized access, confidentiality breaches, theft, and misuses. Concerns around data privacy and user safety were compounded by what was described as the regulatory vacuum that currently surrounds gaming interventions and mental health. And I'm actually going to not talk about the autonomy versus individualization because that's the subject of my conclusion we'll make now. So what? The papers we reviewed largely covered issues at the individual and interpersonal level. Little consideration has been given to the larger political and sociological factors at play in gamifying mental health care. Only one paper in our corpus examined the politics of gamification, referring back to the literature on the ethics of self-help and neoliberal governance. And even beyond this single paper, only a handful of other papers had ethics as their main focus. The lack of focused ethical discussion and the lack of consideration of larger structural factors might be a function of the apparent lack of humanities perspectives in this debate, in this conversation. This might create holes in our understanding of the opportunities and concerns related to applied gaming and mental health care. There was also little cross-referencing between papers published in different journals from different fields. So, for example, foundational studies from the field of game studies critiquing the ethically dubious and coercive nature of gamification elements has not really permeated studies beyond game studies. The digital mental wellness market is expanding exponentially, with more and more games designed for people with mental health problems entering the market every month. Through our review, we have identified enthusiasm for the opportunities presented by using gaming for mental health interventions. However, alongside this excitement, in fact, often directly symmetrically to this excitement, we found that concerns regarding adverse effects have started to emerge. Our analysis highlights the need for deeper and more cross-disciplinary ethical reflection, particularly regarding the economic, social, and political concerns associated with this new form of intervention. We feel that studies across the humanities take into consideration the wider societal implications of digital applied games, which could help us critique the neoliberal privatization and individualization of healthcare, as well as the concept of mental wellness as an optimization strategy for increasing the productivity of biocitizens. In particular, the field would benefit from including studies of representation, critiques of monetization practices in the games industry, studies of gamification and exploitation, the simulation of agency, and autoethnographic studies of the therapeutic effects of both game playing and game making. And that is the end. And we're very happy to take any questions. We also have a question to put to you guys, which is, what would it mean to use video games to treat societal causes of the current mental health crisis rather than to treat an individual's symptoms? So if anyone has any thoughts about that, we'd also love to hear them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma. I don't think we have specific questions directed to you in the Q&A. If the other panelists and speakers have a question, feel free to unmute now and ask your question to Emma, since it seems that you cannot ask a question in the Q&A since you have the panelist power. Otherwise,
I can jump in, Celia.
Yeah. Quick question, because we need to move on as well.
Very quick one. Hi, Emma. Cool talk. I feel slightly attacked as somebody who made a wellness game, but there you go. So this is a bit of a bias question in that kind of you did this systematic analysis and you very much showed these two sides of the coin overall, and it seemed like broadly authors who had expertise with games landed to an extent on the pro side, whereas some of the discussions around some of the concerns that were had seemed to suggest authors with expertise outside of games. But where do you and your co-authors kind of stand on the spectrum of positive to negative, do you think? You're muted.
That's one of the amazing things about co-authored papers, and especially like interdisciplinary collaborations, because this project was part of a larger project called the Attune project, which had loads of people from different fields involved. And I was often the only like games person in the room. Funnily enough, in direct contradiction to what you said, I hate games for mental health. I despise purpose-built sort of serious games interventions for mental health and mental well-being. I'm fundamentally against it, but that's because I think that the therapeutic value of art is nothing to do with sort of edgy game or training or whatever it is. I think video games are, comforting, palliative, restorative, reparative because they're art, not because they are therapeutic tools. So that's my opinion. Whereas like many of my other sort of co-authors and collaborators, they felt really, really differently to me. So I think, again, maybe a strength of this paper, which is on the verge of being submitted to various journals, is actually that we do have a set of authors who sit at polar ends of the spectrum. But maybe Gabby wants to say something different to me on that.
Gabriela, did you want to add up to this before we move on?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with Emma. I think it was a really unique experience. In addition to the 3 authors, we have a bunch of other co-authors from different areas. I am from ethics. Lindsay is a clinical psychologist. So it was really nice to have this very rich meeting of minds to think about this together. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you guys. Very cool.
Thank you so much.